What would you do if a quiet evening drive home with the person you love most slowly turned into the longest hour of your life, on a road with no other cars, no other lights, and no one to call? In today's emotional story, CEO Jack and Tu Tien set out on a routine drive at sunset, the sky burning red across the long, empty road ahead. Through brief, warm conversations, a slow, creeping silence, and the moment the trees outside the window stop looking peaceful and start looking watchful, the two of them are pulled into a confrontation neither of them saw coming. What begins as a calm twilight journey soon becomes the kind of night that strips two strong people down to nothing but each other, leaving behind a marriage that will never look quite the same again. The sunset bled deep red across the long, empty road as Jack gripped the steering wheel with steady eyes fixed ahead. The sky above the asphalt was the color of something burning slowly. The last gold of the day stretched across the horizon like a thin ribbon vanishing into the distance. Beside him in the passenger seat, Tu Tien sat very still, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her face turned softly toward the window where the silent trees were passing one after another in the warm, fading light. Inside the car, the air still carried a fragile peace. The kind of peace that exists only when two people who love each other are alone together with no one else watching. Jack thought quietly about the meeting he had finished an hour ago, about the long week ahead, about the contracts still waiting on his desk in the city. Tu Tien, calm and composed beside him, looked out at the road with the small, private hope of a woman who had been waiting for this quiet drive for many weeks. The breeze slipped gently through the slightly open window. The road hummed softly beneath the tires, but somewhere deep within both of them, a formless unease was beginning to settle. Not from anything they could name, just a small shadow at the edge of the heart, like something waiting at the end of the road. "Anne," Tu Tien said softly after a long, quiet moment. "Yes, it's so quiet on this road today." Jack glanced at her. He smiled gently. "It's always quiet on this road, Tu Tien. That's why I like it." She smiled back, the kind of small, soft smile she gave him when she was trying to keep the mood between them light. Jack felt her presence beside him as the silent source of strength it had always been. Whatever pressure had been weighing on his chest from the long week slowly began to ease. "You don't get a lot of moments like this, Anne," she said softly. "Just the two of us. No phones, no meetings. I know, Em. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. I'm just glad we have tonight." The road stretched on under the deep red twilight. Jack let his foot rest a little lighter on the accelerator. He looked at her once more in the gold light spilling across the dashboard. She looked back at him, calm, certain. For one quiet moment, the long drive felt like the kind of small, precious pause that two busy people remember for years afterwards. But the moment did not last. As the minutes passed, the sun slipped below the horizon and the deep red faded into the heavy blue of true dusk. Jack frowned slightly. He looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind them was empty. He looked at the road ahead. The road ahead was empty too. Tu Tien noticed the change in his face before she noticed the change in the air. Her hand on her lap unconsciously tightened. She turned her head slowly and looked out the window. The trees along the road, which only minutes ago had been peaceful, were now standing in long, dark rows like strange, silent figures watching the car pass. The breeze that had been gentle before was now still. The hum of the tires sounded suddenly louder than it should have. "Anne," she said quietly, "I see it. It's nothing, just a quiet stretch." But Jack's hand had already settled more firmly on the wheel. His eyes had already moved to the side mirrors twice in the last 20 seconds. The peaceful moment between them was dissolving slowly into something neither of them wanted to name. He glanced at her. He saw the small tightness in her shoulders, the way her eyes were fixed forward now instead of looking out the window. She was not panicking. She was the kind of woman who never panicked. But she was alert in the way only women learn to be alert. the kind of quiet alertness that comes from sensing something before there is anything to sense. Jack reached over and put his hand briefly on hers. He said softly, "We're almost out of this stretch. 5 more minutes." "Okay, Anne." He pressed the accelerator a little harder. The car sped along the empty road. The trees blurred past the window. The last of the twilight drained slowly out of the sky behind them. Jack's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. Tu Tien sat beside him in silence, her hand still under his, her face calm but no longer easy. And then, around the gentle bend in the road just past the small hill, the headlights swung forward and caught it. A large wooden log, laid across both lanes, placed deliberately. Jack slammed the brakes, the tires screamed, the car slid forward and stopped less than a meter from the log. Tu Tien's seatbelt locked hard across her chest. She gasped once, sharply, then went completely still. The headlights lit the wood in cold white. For one long second, the only sound was the engine idling. From the dark tree line on the right side of the road, figures began to emerge. They were not running, they were walking. Slowly. In the deliberate way men walk when they know the car in front of them cannot move. 3 of them, 4 of them. Their faces were partly covered with rough cloth. One of them was carrying something long in his right hand. Another was carrying something smaller, held tight against his side. Tu Tien did not breathe. Jack said, very calmly, very low, the voice he used in meetings when something had gone wrong and no one else in the room had noticed yet. "Lock your door, do it now. Don't look at me, just do it." She locked it. Jack reached behind him and locked the back doors. He shifted slightly in his seat so his body was angled between Tu Tien and the driver's side window. His left hand stayed on the wheel. His right hand moved slowly to his pocket, then stopped. "Anne," she whispered, "don't speak just breathe. Stay exactly where you are." The men reached the front of the car. The one with the long object in his hand stopped beside Jack's window. He did not say anything. He looked through the glass at Jack with the kind of empty, patient look that does not belong on any human face, on any quiet road, on any peaceful evening. Then he raised his free hand and tapped the window, twice, slowly. Tu Tien made a small sound she did not mean to make. She covered her own mouth with her hand. Jack looked at the man through the glass. He did not roll the window down. He did not move. His eyes stayed fixed on the eyes of the man on the other side of the glass, and his face was the face of a man who had decided in the last 3 seconds that there was a line on this road that he was not going to allow to be crossed. He said softly, without turning his head. "Yes. Whatever happens in the next minute, you stay in the car. You do not open the door. You do not look at me. You look at the floor. Do you understand?" "Anne, please don't." Tu Tien, "Do you understand?" "Yes." The man outside the window tapped the glass again. Harder this time. Jack's hand tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Beside him, Tu Tien's body was trembling slightly, but her eyes were not afraid. They were resilient. They were the eyes of a woman who had decided that whatever was about to happen, she would not be the one who broke first. The pressure inside the car stretched second by second, until each second seemed longer than the one before it. Jack's mind moved very quickly through every option and discarded most of them. Reverse was blocked. He had seen a 4th figure step into the road behind them. Forward was blocked by the log. The doors were locked, but the windows were not bulletproof. He thought about the small leather case under the driver's seat. He thought about the phone in his pocket. He thought about the woman beside him. He looked at her once, briefly, with a softness she had not seen on his face for many years. Then he turned back to the man at the window. What followed in the next 2 minutes, neither Jack nor Tu Tien would ever be able to describe to anyone afterwards in a way that fully captured it. There was the sound of the man outside speaking through the glass, harsh and quick. there was Jack's voice, low and steady, refusing. There was the moment the man raised the long object and brought it down on the driver's window, the moment Tu Tien cried out, the moment Jack threw his body across her seat to shield her from the glass. There was the sound of headlights behind them, not theirs, other headlights, coming around the bend. Fast. The men outside the car stopped. They turned. They looked at the new headlights for 1 full second. Then they ran. 3 of them disappeared back into the tree line. The 4th one, slower, hesitated for 1 second too long, glanced once into the car at Jack and Tu Tien, then turned and disappeared after the others. The headlights behind them grew brighter. A truck, a simple village truck, loaded with bags of rice for the morning market. It slowed as it approached, then stopped beside the car. The old driver leaned out the window. His face was confused and concerned. "Anne," he called out. "Are you all right? What happened?" Jack opened his eyes. He was still half across the passenger seat, one arm wrapped tightly around Tu Tien's shoulders. He did not let go right away. He turned his head slowly. He looked at the old driver. He looked at the empty road. He looked at the wooden log still lying across both lanes. "We're all right back," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Could you help us move the log?" The old driver climbed down from his truck. Together, the 2 men dragged the log slowly to the side of the road. Jack thanked him quietly. The old driver looked at Tu Tien, still sitting frozen in the passenger seat. He looked back at Jack. He did not ask any more questions. He simply nodded once and said softly, "I'll follow you to the next town, Anne, just in case." Jack nodded. He could not speak. He got back into the car. He closed the door. He sat very still with both hands on the wheel for a long moment. Beside him, Tu Tien finally let out the breath she had been holding for the last 3 minutes. Her body began to shake. She did not cry. She did not say anything. She just shook. Jack reached over and pulled her gently against his chest. I'm here. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. I should have. Stop. Don't." He held her against him for a long minute. The truck behind them waited patiently with its lights on. The empty road stretched out ahead of them. The deep red sunset was completely gone now, replaced by the cold dark blue of a night that had arrived too quickly. When Tu Tien's shaking finally slowed, Jack started the engine again. He drove slowly. The truck followed at a respectful distance behind them. The 2 of them did not speak for many kilometers. There was nothing yet to say, but deep in both of their hearts, they understood that this small, ordinary evening, this short routine drive home, had quietly become something else. They had passed through something tonight that they did not have words for. The peaceful pause before the storm had not been a pause. It had been a warning. And now the warning had passed, and they were on the other side of it together, alive, sitting beside each other in a car that was still moving forward into the night. Tu Tien finally turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were complicated. Regret, gratitude. Something else, deeper, that did not yet have a name. Jack felt her looking at him. He did not turn his head. He did not need to. He simply reached out his right hand from the wheel and placed it gently over hers on the gear shift. She took it. She held on. The road stretched on into the darkness ahead. The truck's headlights moved patiently behind them. Somewhere in the cold, dark blue night, the men who had stepped out of the trees were running through fields they did not own toward a place they did not belong. And inside the car, 2 people who had set out at sunset on a calm, familiar drive sat together in heavy silence, holding hands, carrying invisible wounds they would learn to live with, slowly, the way all couples learn to live with the things they survive together. The lingering horror of what had happened on that road would not leave them quickly. It would change them. It would sit at the edge of every quiet drive they took afterwards, but it would also do something else, something neither of them yet understood. It would make them know, in a way they had not known before, that what they had was worth the road. All of it, even this. Jack squeezed her hand gently. Yes, Anne. We're going home. Yes, and tomorrow morning, we're staying home. For the first time since the headlights had swung around the bend, Tu Tien smiled. Small, tired, real. Yes, Anne, she said softly. Tomorrow morning, we're staying home. The truck behind them kept its lights steady. The dark road stretched on, and the two of them drove the rest of the long, quiet way home together, side by side, no longer the same people they had been at sunset, but still together, still each other's, still home.